quenched. The voice took on flesh and became human and chose to live alongside us. We have seen him enveloped in undeniable splendor, the one true Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. The Gospel of John opens with this famous prologue, these words about the voice, the word, the logos of God, our Jesus. The prologue sets up who Jesus is, God, his origins from before time, and his nature, full of grace and truth. So what does it mean for Jesus as a person to be full of grace and truth? We get an example of how this plays out in his life in the 4th chapter of John. At the beginning of this chapter, things are heating up for Jesus and his crew in Judah. So he took the disciples and headed north to his home region of Galilee. But to get there, they would have to face a choice. Either take the long Jericho road around the central territory or a shorter path right through it. In those days, the Jews of Judah in the south and Galilee in the north hated the people that lived in the middle, in that central territory. They were the Samaritans. The Samaritans were a detested half-breed group that had sprung up after the Assyrians had defeated the northern kingdom of Israel. They sent foreigners as an act of racial and cultural terrorism to colonize and repopulate the area by intermarrying the Jews that were still attempting to live in their ancestral homeland. Over time, the Samaritans became their own people group, having some Jewish traditions, some foreign, and some all their own. They still worshipped the God of the Jews, but they did it wrong and in the wrong place. They kept the law wrong. They talked wrong. They ate wrong. They looked wrong. The true Jews did not associate with the Samaritans. In fact, most of them would need to travel from Judah to Galilee and back by taking that previously mentioned longer roundabout road that would take them far out of the way to avoid even setting foot in the territory of Samaria in fear of becoming unclean. Samaria was the bad neighborhood that the good Jews of the Galilean countryside and the Jerusalem suburbs warned their kids about. Those people were uncontrollable. They were dangerous. They were even potentially contagious. And that is exactly where Jesus leads his disciples. This group of young Jewish men right across the tracks into Samaria. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well, and it was about noon. Jesus had sat down to rest and sent his disciples away to find something to eat. And a Samaritan woman came from the village to draw water. And Jesus asked her, this is verses 7 through 9, "Give me a drink." The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" This is a reasonable question for her to ask. Jesus is clearly Jewish and possibly dressed in sort of rabbinic garb, and yet here he is engaging with her, not only a Samaritan, but a woman. She's confused and potentially nervous about what this Jewish man's intentions for her could be. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it was who was saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And the woman said to him, "Sir, you don't have a bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you think you're going to get water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well, and with his sons and flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I give them will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." The woman said, "Well then, by all means, sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty and not have to keep coming to this well to get water. So Jesus has said something weird, like he does, and the woman bites. If you can keep me from having to come to this well every day, go for it. But Jesus tells her to go and fetch her husband before he does so. And that's when things get a little too real for this unnamed woman at the well. The woman answered him, I have no husband. And Jesus said, yeah, you're kind of right when you say I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. And so the woman, she deflects. Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place that people must worship is Jerusalem. To get the pressure off of her, she goes theological. She asks the rabbi a question about theology and proper worship. And Jesus is patient with her and answers her questions about proper worship with a beautiful description of God and how God seeks to be worshipped, a line that has become memorized and cherished by Christians throughout history. Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship must worship in spirit and in truth." Perhaps she wasn't really expecting an answer, or maybe she doesn't understand what Jesus is saying, which happens pretty frequently. Perhaps the woman just wants this conversation to be over, this conversation that she stumbled into with a strange man outside in the hottest part of the day. Either way, she deflects again. She says, "I know Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." And here it is, that Jesus speaks the truth of his identity for the first time in the Gospel of John. "I am he," says Jesus. This is the first time that Jesus owns up to the title of Messiah in this Gospel. And it's here, to this woman, this maybe adulterer, this Samaritan, this outsider. Jesus extends the fullness of his grace and truth to this woman, subverting religious, cultural, and racial expectations of how these two should interact. He's not afraid of her past or her present situation, but names them honestly and interacts with her patiently. Ultimately, he reveals the fullness of grace and truth and the beauty of his true identity to her. And in doing so, sets off a chain reaction that leads to her community being transformed. She becomes an evangelist, a missionary to her community. And it all starts with the grace and truth offered by Jesus. He doesn't rail against her sin. He doesn't provide commentary on her race. He doesn't attempt to profile her based on her strange middle-of-the-day water-collecting behavior. He extends grace and truth towards her, presenting himself in full to her and inviting her into a new role. We don't get to see that part of the conversation, but when Jesus' disciples get curious about why Jesus was talking to such a person, he tells them that she is one of the laborers doing the work of the Father and reaping eternal life. Here it is, the full grace and truth of Jesus. He doesn't minimize her past, but he doesn't weaponize it either. He names reality, but not to condemn, to invite. He answers her questions and goes deeper into the truth behind them, and he entrusts her with the revelation of who he is. He extends grace and truth in the same breath, and it changes her life. The woman who came to the well at noon, probably trying to avoid her neighbors, leaves her water jar and runs back to her community with the news. She becomes an evangelist, a missionary. She becomes the one who leads her village to Jesus, all because Jesus met her in grace and in truth. Now, here's the part that I really don't want us to miss about Jesus and this outsider. Jesus doesn't just avoid dehumanizing her. he rehumanizes her in this interaction. Her community may have seen her as immoral. The disciples may have seen her as a distraction. She's probably even seen herself as unworthy. Shame tends to reduce us like that. It makes us smaller. It makes us less human in our own eyes. But Jesus refuses the shortcuts of stereotype and judgment. He sees past the labels. Not just a Samaritan, not just a woman, not just a sinner. He sees a human being made in the image of God. And that's rehumanizing. And here's the warning for us. Because we live in a culture that thrives on dehumanization. Our political enemies are animals. Protesters are thugs. Refugees are illegals. People with addictions are junkies. People to our right are fascists, and people to our left are extremists. Even in the church, we are tempted to sort people into categories to protect ourselves from having to love them. Labels like sinner, outsider, atheist, secular. I'm sure you know who those people are. But when we strip away someone's humanity, we deny the image of God in them. And once someone has become dehumanized, it becomes all too easy to dismiss them, to ignore them, to mistreat them, and to destroy them. And that's not the way of Jesus. Jesus shows us another way, the way of grace and truth. Grace that restores dignity, truth that names reality. Together, they don't tear people down, they lift people up. They don't erase someone's story, they redeem it. So may we refuse the world's shortcuts of dehumanization. May we be people who rehumanize, who look into the eyes of those who disagree with us, those who make us uncomfortable, those who the world wants us to fear or hate, and see the image of God staring back. You see, it's not that Jesus just doesn't dehumanize. It's more like Jesus can't dehumanize. And salvation comes to this Samaritan town because the grace and truth of Christ were willing to sit down and talk with a person that he should have been conditioned to hate. The wrong culture, the wrong nation, the wrong religion, the wrong gender, the wrong theology, the wrong lifestyle, the wrong tribe. But Jesus' grace and truth insist on rehumanizing her and rescuing us from being trapped by stereotypes, expectations, and tribal divisions. So let me ask, who is it for you? Who have you been told to despise, to avoid, to write off? Who is it that feels like the wrong kind of person to be in your world? Because Jesus calls us to look at them again and see them as human, and to see in them the fullness of the image of God. May we have the courage to be people of grace and truth, to meet people where they are with honesty, patience, grace, and love, the same way that Jesus has been with us. Give grace and truth a chance. Practice the art of rehumanization and see if your world doesn't change around you.